Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Web Platform Podcast. We're having fun. We've just started. Today we're talking episode number 145.
-2.
It's the Thanksgiving special. That's right. The turkeys are in the house. It's the day before Thanksgiving. For those of you not in the United States, Thanksgiving's the day before we start buying a whole bunch of stuff that we probably don't need. We are your hosts this week. That's a horrible segue. We're your hosts this week: Justin Ribeiro, Leon Revill, Danny Blue, Amal, Hussein. Hello, wonderful
Hello.
people.
Hello, Justin.
Hola.
So we don't have a guest today. We're not doing This Week in Web because it's kind of a holiday-ish week here in the United States where, again, people are traveling at this point. If you're stuck in an airport listening to this podcast right now, we wish you the very best of hopefully not being stuck in your travels. But instead of having a guest this week, we're just talking about things that we're particularly thankful for because as developers, we get to play with some cool stuff. So we thought instead of the usual guest this week, we'll talk about thanks. So who would like to start with? What are you thankful for in this wonderful season of web platform goodness?
I can go first. So I do also want to point out to all of our listeners, this is our second go around at recording this podcast. The first one imploded on itself. So round 2, here we go.
The jokes are funnier.
Yeah. We've already tested it and figured out what doesn't work. So one of the things that I am thankful for is actually ends up being kind of a bummer, or is potentially a bummer going forward. But that is the current implementation of net neutrality laws as of November 22nd, 2017. So if anybody is not familiar with the situation right now in the United States, the FCC wants to propose repealing a certain set of Obama era net neutrality laws, which ensure that internet service providers or ISPs cannot treat traffic differently. So, for example, if Comcast decides to start its own Netflix competitor, right now it is illegal for them to slow traffic going to Netflix in favor of traffic going to their own streaming service. Without the net neutrality laws in place, the ones that they are considering repealing, that would then be legal. That would be something that is allowed. Now, ISPs have, I think Verizon has famously said, it's like, oh, well, we would never do that, but I trust ISPs about as far as I can throw them. And as they are large corporate entities, that's nowhere. So the current implementation of net neutrality, I think, is a very good thing, not just for the United States, but for the overall state of the free and open web, or kind of free in quotation marks, but the open web. And I really hope that that they stay in place. And so, also, if you do live in the United States, I would heavily encourage you to call your representatives, and so they can raise a stink about it, and so we can have continue to have an open web.
Yeah, these kind of laws are so important because we rely on our internet connection so much nowadays, and the fact that these large corporations can basically choose what experience we get, and especially as developers delivering things over the web as well. I mean, it seems terrible that we'd build something really cool, and then some company like that could basically make the experience miserable. That's terrible.
Yes, no amount of service working can undo, what net neutrality, can do to your sites and your customers and your users' experiences. So the EFF actually, for those of you in the United States, posted a really great, easy 2-click form so that you can just let your local representatives know that you're upset about this and you want them to vote appropriately. So check out EFF.org, and we'll also link that in the show notes.
The podcast is finally doing something positive for the web. Yes.
This is an actual contribution. I did want to give one other example, and this is actually something that we have seen pop up in other countries that don't have these laws, but it is internet so if you can think about, I'm gonna pick on Comcast. So if for your your cable TV, you buy different packages, and that's not uncommon. What repealing these net neutrality laws would legally allow companies to do is to create packages like that. Now, it doesn't mean it's as soon as that happens, you're going to lose access to Facebook, but legally they could. They could create a social media package, and they could create a sports package. And what's terrible about that is that they can actually make people pay two ways. They can make consumers pay for access, but then they can also pay. So if there's a sports package, you can charge certain websites to be a part of that package. So it's overall, it's very, I don't even know. The internet would not work the way that we are used to it working now if some of these things go away.
Yeah, it's definitely a very, I think people think of it as sometimes, because it's a very hard thing to wrap your head around. I mean, as developers, we're used to saying, I want to push to my cloud provider of the day, and all of a sudden now I'm instantly available to the world. And that could very much go away. And it could very much restrict the speech that we have grown to sort of, expect given our civil liberties. And at that point, you were being restricted as to what you can deliver, what you can say, what you can sort of show the world. And if you really, the vote is on December 14th. It's not set in stone. So do call your representative in office. There's a great site, battleforthenet.com, that you can put in your phone number, find out who your rep is, and get an immediate script on how to call. And there's also a protest going on December 7th outside of Verizon retail stores across the United States. So if you really want to go out there and protest things, and if you're wondering why Verizon, the current FCC chairman was a top lawyer at Verizon, in case anybody's wondering. So it might kind of make things a little bit more understandable as to why things are going on. And this week, there's already been 222,000 calls made through that website since the announcement was yesterday on the 21st. So kudos to those out there trying to fight the good fight. I will be calling immensely over the next several days. So sans net neutrality and the fact that we now have a new battlefront to deal with, what else is everybody else thankful for the platform? I really do enjoy the open web. It's quite fun. I would hate to see it go away. But what else is, what else is sort of really got you going in terms of 2017 in terms of development these days?
I can go next. I'm super. I have to say, it's kind of this awesome technology that I'm very excited about. That is the underpinning behind a lot of other awesome technology, and that's Babel, or Babel, or Bubblaboo, whatever you want to call it, whatever suits you. But Babel is incredible. It's a tool that allows us to write modern JavaScript, even JavaScript that's in very early stages of proposal. So it's, kind of freed us, and it's super reliable, not, very, very little issues, got great documentation. And they recently come out with a package called Babel Preset M, which just allows you to very declaratively say, hey, I want to just transpile for the browser versions that I support, and it'll automatically take care of that for you. So you can just say the last two versions of Safari, the last three versions of Chrome, and so they're just, Babel's awesome. I love Babel. I'm super grateful for Babel. I'm hoping you guys all agree.
I'd like to add something to that. So obviously, Babel is really useful for the things you just mentioned there, but something else that I find it quite useful for is actually understanding how some features work. So, if you start using a really new ES Next feature and you've got no idea how it's really implemented, just looking at the transpiling code, even though obviously that's not the way it will be really implemented, it at least allows you to see how you would implement it in ES5 or whatever. So you can kind of get a better understanding of how a feature actually works under the hood, which I think is really useful to understand how things actually work.
Yeah, I completely agree. Babel implements from the spec, from the JavaScript spec, from the actual ECMA spec. So it's a great place to look. There's certain things, obviously, like object assign, right? That's a polyfill. That's not something that is transpiled, but both places are awesome places to look, both the polyfill code base as well as the transpile code base.
Yeah, so many of those tools that are out there today, like Babel, you hear about them a lot, but I'm always curious as to how people use them. I mean, I use them in builds and everything else when there are particular targets there. But you think about Babel, like Babel's got a pretty nifty little REPL too. Like you can sit there and play with, a whole cauldron of things right in your web browser without having to set up any sort of environment, just to see and learn sort of how it works. And I think a lot of times when you've been in development a long time, like everything can be quite, as challenging everything is, it's still, not quite as easy to grasp these days if you're just getting into it. There are so many things to get into now, like where do you start? And I like to see the ripples. Like I enjoy when someone can just go in, push some code in, and see what it does instantly. I think it puts people at ease. So kudos to the Babels of the world out there who are going, hey, here's a nice little demo for you to use on our website that may or may not convince you that this is actually the thing that you want to use on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I'm working on inviting Henry Zhu, one of the lead contributors, and possibly one other member from his team, his core team, to come on the Web Platform podcast in December. So watch out.
Who else has got something magical out there that the turkeys of the world want to be thankful within, because they're really turkeying it up out there? And I think I've overused the turkey sound at this point. Leon, what are you thankful for?
I'm quite thankful for something that will make a lot of people shudder, perhaps. I'm really thankful for Polyfills and their authors and people who contribute to maintaining Polyfills, because that stuff is hard. Polyfills, they get a lot of kind of negative press, as it were, because they can, cause a lot of frustration and cause interesting bugs on all these different platforms. But at the end of the day, Polyfills allow us to try out new technologies sooner, and allow us to sometimes use technologies in production sooner, which is really shouldn't be overlooked. And as I said, it's particularly around the web component polyfills. Like some of those polyfills are immense and incredibly difficult to get right and maintain and bug fix and all those other kind of things as well. So I just wanted to show my appreciation for everybody who's working on polyfills and polyfills as a whole.
Polyfills are hard.
Well, it's also a very underappreciated too. That I think that's you're giving love to the unthanked, but often used tool.
Well, it also depends on exactly what the thing is that you're trying to polyfill. So some of them are pretty straightforward, like object.assign, Amal, that you mentioned earlier, is actually a fairly easy thing to polyfill. And then there's other stuff like Shadow DOM, which has been historically nightmarish to polyfill. So, but I mean, none of it is easy. And I mean, I do know that this is the first time, like I'd say on the project I'm working on right now, it's the first time in a very long time that I'm not having to use any real polyfills. I mean, technically I'm doing stuff in Angular, so I'm using Zone.js, which is, I mean, it's not a polyfill. So, I mean, it kind of is, but the chances of it being actually implemented in JavaScript are so extraordinarily small. I'm not going to call it a polyfill. But yeah, like you think about, especially in the I'd say IE7. Yeah, we'll just go back to IE7. Those days, it was like polyfills were a lifesaver of being able to ship stuff quickly to the point that it wasn't broken. So it's just been because nowadays, like we're shipping stuff so fast in browsers, how quickly stuff comes out in Chrome and Firefox Edge as well. I mean, Safari maybe not so much, but I mean, they're not as bad as IE was back in the day. So some people might not remember having to support, a lot of these older browsers, but like it was really, really difficult. That's why things like jQuery became so popular, not because it did anything miraculous. It just kind of organized a bunch of stuff because all of the APIs were different. So we're very fortunate now that we're to have such well maintained browsers, and polyfills were I would say they were a requirement, especially I'd say even 5 years ago.
Yeah, I could completely agree. I mean, it's amazing how fast everything's happening nowadays. But the kind of fact is, I don't think polyfills are really going to be going away at all. Hopefully, we'll have to rely on them a lot less as browsers push things forward a lot faster. But I was passed a really interesting document which I didn't know existed by Rob Dodson the other day, which is a document on w3.org about polyfills. And this particular document kind of discusses some like best practices and some advice for creating polyfills for polyfill authors, web developers, library and framework authors, distributors, spec editors, and all that kind of stuff. And it kind of tries to explain some of the issues with using polyfills or polyfilling too early. An example they put on there is the shadow DOM and the create shadow root method. That was like an early, very early on in the specification. To create a shadow root, you'd use the create shadow root method. And then we created some pretty big polyfills that got quite widely used. And because that so many people were using it, then they actually had to change the way you create a shadow root to attach shadow, because it was harder to iterate on because of all these people kind of using that particular method in this polyfill, etc. So there can actually be some negative effects, polyfilling too early and having wide adoption. So it's quite interesting to read this document to see some of the advice on how we can kind of prevent some of those situations, and just figure out how we can make sure that moving forward we can create really good polyfills, use them responsibly, and all those other kind of things as well. So I'll make sure that document gets in the show notes.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Leon. I think that's also some software lessons learned there around knowing when to release, right? You release too early, it's super painful. You release too late, it's you've built things that people don't want to use, right? So it's this like really interesting balance of like when to share and and what form to share, and how to mark alpha versus beta versus production ready. But actually I wanted to go back to Danny's earlier point about jQuery, because I think like polyfilling and or working around the lack of browser interoperability has been a thing that's been around for a long time, right? It's actually why jQuery is a thing, and it's been really common in the CSS world and the rendering world as well, with tools like Modernizer. And one thing that I'm really grateful for is that it seems like moving forward that this potentially could be less of a thing, as browsers are getting together to really hone down interoperability, and projects like Web Platform Tests and Test 262. Which Test 262 is the project that tests the JavaScript language, and all, browser vendors can, are integrated there to, check their implementations of how, their engines parse JavaScript, and have implemented the spec. And Web Platform Tests is another open source project that was recently started out of Google, that kind of has brought together, has brought all the browser vendors to the same table, to say, hey, yes, these are the APIs that we are going to implement, and we're going to check our implementation against the same set of tests so that, we can make sure that, we're all on the same page. And so it's really exciting. Browsers are competing for speed, security, developer experience, so as software engineers, these are things that we greatly benefit from. And as users of the internet, right, our users and, us being users as well, get to benefit it, so it's really exciting.
Yeah, I think polyfills, I use them quite a bit in terms of shipping things. The polyfill landscape has changed a lot with the web moving forward so very quickly. And, I think the thing that comes out of it is that, it has changed the way that we develop for the web. When I hear people say, I don't use polyfills very much, I often say, does that mean you're using progressive enhancement? Do your greenfield browsers get, the wonderful goodness that is the new stuff? Or, are you, gracefully degrading your experience over time? And a lot of times people haven't really given that much thought. Like, they just presume that everyone in their sort of ecosystem is on new browsers that are fast and quick and have wonderful connections. But that's not always the case. So to Leon's point, I don't think polyfills go away anytime soon. I think certain things are not going to get polyfilled. I just don't think from an engineering standpoint it makes much sense. I know that there's always folks out there trying to do those sorts of things for certain new features that come up in the web. And we may see, I don't think that's going to change overall, but as the web moves faster forward, will we have the same amount of polyfills that we have today? Hard to tell for sure.
Yeah, it is hard to tell, and it's also gotten much easier now. So with things like I think it's Polyfill.io, is the one I'm thinking about. I will. Yeah. So
that's
so
right.
there are also things out there now that make it much easier to progressively enhance some of the stuff that you have, or I wouldn't even say progressively enhance, but just only delivering the polyfills to browsers that need it, and not delivering them to browsers that don't. Because that's something else that I've seen. Seen some people struggle with. For example, the Angular CLI spits out a polyfills file for you, and it lets you, if a bunch of stuff in there that you can uncomment based on the browsers that you need. But folks will just uncomment the stuff they need to make it running, and then they're actually shipping a bunch of code to Chrome and Firefox that doesn't need to be there. So something like Polyfill.io makes it so that you don't have to think about it. You can tell it, these are the features that I need to make sure are there, and for browsers that don't have them, it will go fetch them, and browsers that do, it would it's just then browsers that have them, it doesn't.
I think that's the one thing that made Modernizer so interesting. As someone who used to write feature tests for it, for really, really weird, bizarre things that we used to hook into things, hook to browsers and whatnot in places that I don't necessarily think they probably should have been, but by God, we put them there. Modernizer was really great for that sort of thing, where you needed to feature detect things and they had a weird case and it was a hard feature to find. But if it had it, you had to, it was one of those things that there was no fallback. Either you were there or you weren't. And I still have projects that Modernizer is in now that, sort of do that thing very well. Because beforehand, there was a lot of, in the olden days of times of yore, where we used to say, what kind of browser are you? As opposed to, do you have this feature? It was a dark time for the polyfills. It was mostly, just a, sort of rolling the dice to see exactly where you ended up, because of the nature of, user agent strings and whatnot. And it was a terrible way to do things. So I think if you can feature detect and fill on the fly, you are generally better off. And again, you don't, as to your point, Danny, you don't want to send all that down the wire. You don't send things down the wire that users aren't going to use.
And someone should make a jingle for that, like a developer jingle. That would be so cool, right? Don't use things your browsers or your users don't need. La 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 la, something like that. You guys don't agree?
I think that's it. I think you've already done it.
That's the jingle right there. That is the jingle.
Okay.
I'm cutting that right out and tweeting it as soon as we finished it.
Well, somebody needs to do that in like a unicorn head out, that, or horse head, mask, and then we're good. That'll be great.
Listeners, if you get this podcast 2 weeks late, it's because I've been doing that instead.
Yeah, well, wouldn't it be cool if we put there was some 10 commandments of developers, don't do this, there'd be the 10 commandments of delivered to you by some anonymous developer in a horse head mask. So but anyways, I wanted to say that in the spirit of talking about browsers and interoperability, I think it's one important thing to mention is all the progress we've seen, in JavaScript, and the speed at which we've seen features get added to the language. And so I'm really grateful for TC39 and the ratio of TC39 more recently, including a higher number of practitioners, people like us, that are writing code in userland, who are, just used to faster and more iterative cycles than your traditional academia, language spec nerds, basically, right? And so it's really great, and go TC39, and thank you for pushing the language forward.
The language specs have come a long way. I think the community involvement, I'm pretty thankful as well for the community involvement that we see in so many of the specification processes, whether that's TC39 or the WIGIG. I still have no idea how to pronounce it. The Web Incubator Community Group, which is a good way to get involved with trying to bring new features to the web platform as a whole. So a lot of times in the past, those things were not attainable by the people like us on the ground who are writing code that reach end users, as opposed to folks who work on, this much larger sort of specification landscape. The fact that we have those meetings now and you have those conversations in those groups and at many of the conferences and meetups about specification level things where, as a developer, your opinion can be heard in a much better way, right? We can go forth and say, this feature just doesn't do what I needed to do. And, to some extent, that's how, we ended up with sort of like the extensible manifesto and how we needed more level primitives on the web. And well, what do those low level primitives look like? Well, then, as a developer, I really need this. Oh, we should build that. And here's now 1 spec and 2. And then all of a sudden you've now find that your features that you needed are starting to land in those browsers. And I think that's a pretty amazing thing that we've seen sort of take a foothold across the entire web community, whether you're building on frameworks or libraries, or you're just building parts of random browsers or cores or extensions. There's so many aspects of it now across such wide range of people that have all this input, and the web has sort of gotten better because of it, I think. Leave it to me to say things that immediately kill every conversation.
No,
this is the 3rd time I have said something today.
We are contemplating, and
I was just waiting for it.
We are sitting. We're sitting at your feet, Web Zen Master Justin. Really. Justin is the youngest, oldest person I know. Just an FYI, you're like the youngest.
Is that a compliment?
It is. It's definitely it's a compliment because I have East African heritage, and in my with all the lovely baggage that comes with that. One of the pros, I think, is our respect for elders. So for me, it is absolutely
okay. I'm not.
Yes.
To be clear, I mean, I'm fine with being old, but I'm not that old.
You're not that old. You've just been writing for the web since Al Gore invented the internet, right? So that's all. You started writing software.
I did meet Al Gore in an internet cafe, and he was like, "Dude, just start writing for this. It's going to be huge." And I was like, "Al, of course." And he was still wearing a beard back then. Okay, maybe that wasn't Al Gore and he's just a guy in a coffee shop. But at the end of the day, I got here, and now here we are.
I wouldn't think
talking about it years later.
Yeah. Well, you've just been really contributing to the conversation for a very long time, and it's always really great to talk to you. And this is one of the things I'm thankful for is all of your context and history and the whys, and so it's really refreshing, and it's not a luxury that I encounter every day. Most people I know have been writing software for 15 years, less than 15 years, so a lot of the context and history I think that you are aware of, being involved so early in the conversation. It's always really great talking to you. So thank you, Justin.
Well, well, no, you're welcome. But the only thing I really did was, here's Justin's tip for figuring out what's going on out there. Basically, sign up for lots of mailing lists and just listen. A lot of people want to talk, and I'm all for talking. Obviously, we're sitting on a podcast right now having a conversation. But I learned quite a bit from just sitting on mailing lists for a lot of years, just watching conversations go back and forth. Because and I think that's why a lot of people find it hard to get started. Like if you really are like, oh, you know what, this would be a nifty feature, but how do I get in with titans of, the web to build things that are, that might be interesting to people beyond myself? That's an intimidating thing. I mean, I'm always intimidated, going into a lot of those conversations because I know what I know, but I also know what I don't. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that not everyone does. You can't know everything, but if you listen, a lot of times you'll have a much clearer understanding as to a path that may not currently make sense, but does make sense in the long run. And I think that's where a lot of the hand-wringing comes in today, is that people, by the time that someone is speaking within the context of, maybe they're talking about JavaScript, or maybe they're talking about a platform feature, or maybe they're talking about, it's a framework conversation. A lot of people aren't listening, right? They're sitting there waiting for their in to say the thing that they think is interesting or important or controversial. Just listen, take that pause and, listen to the conversation, and you may find that, and that's kind of how I learned. I literally stood next to people, said hello, and listened to conversations and nodded and kind of, tilted my head to the left when I didn't quite understand what the hell was going on. And that sort of allowed, sort of me to understand a grander scope of things, and try to contribute where I can, either with, a lot of times that wasn't spec. Maybe mostly it was just feedback. So if you're looking to get started and you want to be part of that, come and listen and then chime in. Don't worry. Some people, will do the normal trolley thing. Ignore those people. Ignore the trolls. Don't feed the trolls. Just be true to what you want to do and contribute, and everything will work out.
That is some fine advice.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's commandment number 2 is,
listen
don't
to
feed
Justin.
the trolls. No, don't feed the trolls.
Yeah, never feed the trolls. You don't have to listen to me. Like, no, I question, like,
Okay.
even when my kids are looking at me going, no, Dad, no, not today. We're not buying this.
So I do have one other thing that I'm thankful for that I've really spent a lot of time with this year. And this is not specific to the web platform, but it is about JavaScript, and that is RxJS. And not even just RxJS, but the kind of rise of functional reactive programming for in the web. So RxJS was, starting to become popular. Angular makes heavy use of it. But one of the things that I like a lot about it is that it kind of seems like a no-brainer. So there is actually a spec proposal for observables in the JavaScript language. So we can probably find a link to the there's a GitHub. There's a GitHub project that talks about what that spec is and shows that RxJS is an implementation of the spec that they are proposing. And it kind of seems strange that we haven't had them up to this point. We had callbacks forever. Those, worked fine. We just recently got promises, which are great, but they are not good for streams of information. A promise is a thing, and then it's done. Whereas an observable can have continuous information pushed to it. The best, I think the easiest illustrative example is if you actually look in the RxJS DOM library, there is a method called from_event. So you can create an observable stream from a browser event. So you pass it an HTML element and the event that you want to listen to. and that will return you an observable of that particular event that you can listen to and react to, and use all of the really cool operators, making things like debounce trivially easy. If you want a really easy way of, if you have something that happens on scroll and making sure that doesn't overload it, you can, observable dot from event, pass it the window object and the scroll event, and then just say debounce, and then it happens. And it just seems, for the type of programming that you do on the web, or specifically in JavaScript, which is an event-driven language, it seems silly almost that we haven't had it up to this point. But it's something that has made me think about solving problems in different ways, and is something that I think would benefit the overall web platform greatly to be baked into the JavaScript language.
I'm with you on that, Danny. I think RxJS is amazing. It did take me so long to wrap my head around how it works, because it was so different to anything I'd ever done before. So it really did take me a while to figure out what I was trying to do. But once it kind of clicked, once I understood what was going on, it's such a refreshing way to do stuff. So totally agree with you there.
Yeah, I agree. It would be wonderful to get that natively. Isn't there some traction on that, Danny?
As far as I know, there is a little bit. It is currently going through the proposal phase. I have no idea how long or the type of effort it would take to actually implement into the JavaScript language on its own. But in general, I just think it would be. There seems to be some community support behind it. It's actually something I didn't know for a very long time, because there's an observable stream spec itself, I believe. And if anybody out there knows, which I'm sure many of you know way more about this than I do, there is an observable or reactive streams spec that RxJS and RxJS is not the only reactive streams implementation in JavaScript. There's one called Xstream. There are several others. RxJS is probably the most known, though. But it implements that spec. And so all of the different reactive extensions, RxJava and RxScala, all of those implement that same spec. And then the ECMAScript proposal is to implement that spec, which is currently implemented by RxJS, and implement that natively in the browser. So there does seem to be a little bit of support. Like, it's one of those not exactly long shots, but not exactly guaranteed ones that, I'm starting to watch. I'm starting to watch much more closely to see if we can get that, because also, if it's part of the spec, that also means it's something we would get natively in Node as well at some point, which would also be fantastic. And then until then, there's RxJS, which is excellent, and they're doing stuff now as well to make it easier to ship less code to the browser, which was not as big of an issue for Node. But hey, if we get observables natively, we don't need to ship anything.
Yeah, honestly, that's so cool and such a good point, Danny. Like, you bring up this like one less lib to maintain, right? Which is great. It frees up maintainers to solve new problems, and it means like smaller bundles and like less overhead for us and our users, which is awesome. So yay for no library, but on the same token, in the same note, I want to say yay for libraries and frameworks, because really, they help push innovations on the platform, right? And there's this really interesting dynamic that's kind of been forming like lately, with frameworks and innovations made in the open source world, feeding back into the platform, right? And you're seeing interesting proposals come in, both on the web platform side and the JavaScript side, just as you pointed out with observables, being pushed by implementations that are loved and supported, and that have been well tested in the wild using libraries and frameworks. So thank you, libraries and frameworks, and that's something that I'm thankful for, that they help fill in the gaps and solve problems and help push innovation. And it's one of the reasons why while I appreciate the hashtag use the platform, I always kind of, I like using it with a caveat, right? Because it's really, where would we be without the innovation that comes from open source contributions like Ember, React, Angular, Vue, underscore, I think half of Lodash should actually just be native. And I'm kind of like, I think Sharon Diorio, she's another GDE based in Boston, brought up a really good point about, why are we supporting decorators in the language and classes before, half of the utility methods in Lodash, right? So, so anyways, I beat the dead horse, but thank you, libraries and framework authors. You guys are awesome. You push all of us forward, and and you're making the web better.
Well put.
For those so interested, the Observable TC39 proposal is currently at stage 1. It is the champion for that proposal believes it's ready to advance, but it has not yet been presented to committee for stage 2. So it's still a ways off, but ideally, if it makes it into stage 2, I mean, things go up the chain. We'll put a link in the show notes as well, if you want to see what kind of features are inbound or people are working on in terms of TC39. You can always go to the GitHub repo, but we'll put a link in the show notes for those.
I've got something that I'm also incredibly, insanely grateful for. It's a really, really simple thing, but I'm so grateful for it, and that is arrow functions. The ability to not have to get confused with scope and all that other kind of stuff when you've got functions and within functions, arrow functions is so incredibly useful. So much so that it is so painful going back to writing just ES5 because you get so used to having that amazing capability. But yeah, super grateful for loads of ES 2015 features, obviously, but arrow functions in particular is one of my favorites.
My muscle memory already barely lets me write the function keyword anymore. It's just immediately I try to do the arrow, and then sometimes I end up with these if for some reason I have to go back to doing it the other way, because there actually are legitimate reasons to not use arrow functions.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Depending on what you're doing.
Oh, yeah.
But so in those times where I need to do it, it always feels wrong. Like, and it's not. It's totally valid. It's totally valid. So like sometimes for browser events and stuff like that, this object you want to be the thing coming back from the because it will reference the DOM element or whatever it is. So depending on exactly what you're doing, it's there. But my muscle memory just immediately, I've actually run into the opposite problem actually it's the same problem of why isn't this what I want it to be? And it's because I'm using an arrow function instead of a regular function.
Yeah, I've hit that a few times.
So I have a quick trick for you, dot bind and then brackets this. So that helps with that problem. But anyways, arrow functions are amazing. I do not miss writing var _self equal this. Like that should be on like a vintage like web developer t-shirt or something. Don't you guys think?
I feel there aren't enough vintage web developer t-shirts in the world, so I agree with that statement wholeheartedly. And yeah, I mean, arrow functions. I enjoy arrows quite a bit. As someone who remembers the wonderful world of, I'm sure if you're still in the old code bases, you still see .bind. I'm always shocked that most people, I realize that that's a pretty good tip because I've had to teach people .bind a lot over the years. Like, what does bind do? Like, it's not one of those things that just immediately pops out to you, but arrow functions seem to be way more accessible than bind ever was. Like people have just automatically go, oh yeah, of course, arrow functions, I know how this works, which is I think is a really nice thing for the platform.
I do always still ask about bind, call, and apply in interviews because it is still an important thing to know because it shows an understanding of why arrow functions, it's not just a syntax, a little bit more of an understanding, like, okay, well, this is why arrow functions are so useful in these situations.
Yeah, totally.
It's a good point.
I definitely use bind a lot when writing like React components sometimes, just because depending on where the callback is that you're trying to reference, it may or may not be an arrow function, right? Because
that's why events are better than callbacks.
No, totally agreed. This is not new code, Trust, but yes, I agree. I'm with you, Daddy. Everything is an event. That's another good T-shirt, and then it should say RxJs on the side or something, right? So But anyways, so I actually have something that I did want to say I'm thankful for is like all of you wonderful co-hosts. You guys are amazing, and I love that we get to talk and share and learn and grow together like week after week. I've been on the podcast a little over a year now. I think so is Leon and some other old timers. Justin has been on the show since inception. I think since
That's not true.
No,
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 I was not on.
you weren't.
Yeah, Danny and I came on about the same time.
I think I beat Justin by like a week or two.
Okay. So we're having like a battle here over who's got more.
I don't want to
cred?
be always the old person. I don't. Oh, it's too late now.
I don't know
It's
if
too
I
late
actually believe that. I don't know if I actually believe that statement, because you would stop saying all the smart things that you say if you don't always want to be the old person. You say a lot.
You were way smarter than me. Like I
No.
you talk about wonderful co-host. You are a wonderful co-host, Mom.
No.
You know all the. You guys know way more than I do. You know, I'm very appreciative. I'm appreciated Eric, who started the podcast. And I think, Leon, you said it best during, who did you thank, Leon, that was not a co-host?
I'd like to thank, I'm very grateful for something which is probably the most important thing to be thankful for in everything we talked about today. And that's the people who listen to us ranting every week on this podcast. So thank you so much for listening to the Web Platform Podcast as much as you do, whether it's once every week or however many times. Thank you very much.
We would not have a podcast without listeners, or we could, but then it would just be
We'd have a
weird,
very poorly performing podcast.
it would just be.
Our podcast would need a service worker. Just kidding. Yeah, actually, sorry, hold on. How have we not brought up service workers? I think we brought this up in our first attempt at recording this, but service workers are amazing. They make you feel like the browser god. You can make anything happen, make your users get whatever you want them to get or not get. And there's a general empathy for user data and user experience, which is growing and is much needed. So, you know, those Time magazine covers where it's like person of the year. So I feel like the web person of the year is like a disgruntled 2G user, you know, and that person is getting a lot of love now with PWAs and more sensitive bundles, you know, and thank you for tools like Webpack that make it really easy to do performance budgeting and be cognizant of our bundles. So thank you, Webpack, and tools that and the evolution of tools that have led up to Webpack, right? Because we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. So
Yeah, this is a good point. I think that the tooling, I think it can be difficult to start, but once you get into the tooling today, being able to deliver really solid experiences across a very wide range of browsers is still not super easy, but it's now accessible to a level of developer that may not have quite understood why that was important to begin with, right? Because not everyone has quite the clear picture. But the 2G point is, I think, well taken, Amal. Like the nature of the way that we build things for the web today, it can be, I don't think it's particularly any easier than when browsers didn't support all the things we needed. Now that browsers do support all the things we needed, now we have to worry about the network. And we have to worry about the varying degrees of connectivity we have. And things like Service Worker, they fill that gap. I know a lot of people are still somewhat terrified of Service Worker because of the nature of how powerful it can be. And tools like Workbox take a lot of that complexity out. But we have the power to deliver those good experiences now between tools and platform APIs. And that's something that I think any web developer out there is probably going, yeah, that I'm thankful for that these days.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Extremely thankful. And it's tools like Grunt and Gulp and I can't think of anything else right now. Browserify and, Rollup and JSPM and, Broccoli and all these other things that have led up to all these really awesome evolutions. So thank you to like all of those contributors. Your work is still relevant and is, it's just being used in a different context.
So before we finish up here, I've got a special announcement to make. But before I do that, I'd just like to kind of reiterate thank you to all you guys for being on the podcast with me. It's such a great experience, and special thanks. I know Justin's already mentioned Eric, but special thanks to Eric for starting the podcast in the first place. For getting us all together and allowing us to basically do this. So thank you very much to him. And the special announcement is that the Web Platform Podcast is finally getting a brand new website, which hopefully will be rolling out in the next few weeks, certainly by the end of the year. It's written in Vue.js. It uses Firebase in the back end. It should be a really nice experience. Nothing too fancy just yet. We'll, of course, be iterating and adding new features, but there'll be a really great place to see all of the episodes, see all of the resources, all of the This Week in Web news, and all the kind of great stuff all in one place that you'll be able to visit very soon. So really looking forward to that moving into the next year.
And a huge thanks to Leon for spearheading for spearheading the new website. Leon has done by far the most work on it. But yeah, so thank you very much, Leon, for actually doing that.
By most, he means pretty much all of the work.
I do mean pretty much all.
Yeah. So all of the praise and all of the bugs shall be directed at Leon. We will include his personal email in the show notes.
Apart from Amal, thank you.
Ouch. Anyways. Well, thank you guys. It's been so much fun. Yay. And I guess, yeah, do you Papa Justin, Web Platform Papa Justin? I don't know.
I will not call you.
I'm now just annoying Justin even more. I'm sure I'm sure I'm breaking some code of conduct rule somewhere, but I'm gonna claim ignorance here, or just extreme admiration to be more specific. Actually, it's not ignorance, but do you want to close this out, Justin?
I can do that. Thank you all for being on the show today. It's again always a pleasure to have everyone on. And this indeed has been episode number 145 of the Web Platform Podcast. It's been the Thanksgiving Day special. The turkeys are happy. If you're traveling out there this holiday season, we hope that you have a very safe traveling time onto your destination. We hope that you have a wonderful holiday season and look forward to seeing you as we close out the rest of 2017. Thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Goodbye, everyone.